Nosferatu Zodd is quite the peculiar entity within the Berserk universe. His intentions are quite clear. He wants to seek out and fight the strong. Nothing more, nothing less. Yet at the same time, he's an enigmatic man who acts on his own accord. When the other apostles were indulging in the sadistic festival known as the Eclipse, he waited outside. He takes no pleasure in brutalizing the weak and defenseless. Rather, he finds it quite mundane and uninteresting. And that's the thing, there's an emptiness to his strength that can't be quelled so easily. In some regards, he's too strong for his own good. But for those who do prove themselves worthy, he has nothing but respect for them. He will either seek them out, or in Griffith's case, serve under them in hopes of finding ever stronger foes. But enough introductory statements. Let's get into the meat of the video, and that's the entire life of Nosferatu Zodd. At least, the life that we know about. Now for the purposes of this video, I'm going to provide some speculative theories that may or may not be correct. The Berserk universe is filled with various context clues that I believe Mira left behind on purpose for us to figure out. So with that, let's begin with what I believe was the beginnings of Zodd's life. And for that, we start off in chapter 53. In this chapter, Guts, Charlotte, and the members of the Band of the Hawk are on a covert mission to save Griffith from the depths of the Midland torture chambers. In their descent, Charlotte tells a story of Supreme King Geyserich, an emperor who subjugated dozens of nations to establish an age-old empire, encompassing the entire continent. Now I believe Geyserich was an amalgamation of Skull Knight and Zodd. And you might be wondering to yourself, how can this be? Well, I believe that Skull Knight was the human portion of King Geyserich, with Zodd being the internal beast of darkness. I came to this conclusion because Geyserich went by two different names. One, Demon King, and two, King of Galloping Death. One name pertains to Nosferatu Zodd, and the other one seems to pertain to the Skull Knight. He also dons a dreadful helmet that is shaped after a skull that features a beast on the forehead that looks much like Zodd's apostle form. There are other clues throughout the manga that I will point out when we get there, but for now, let's move forward with Zodd's portion of the story. Now, the only other thing that we know about Zodd's past is that he's killed hundreds, even thousands in the battlefield. In fact, there's a rumor that he's dead, and that he always shows up on some other battlefield. People have been telling these stories for close to 100 years, hence the name Nosferatu Zodd. Rickard says that some mercenaries refer to Zodd as a battlefield god. Unsure what to think about this, Griffith remains silent, showing some signs of trepidation. Delos then exits the Tudor castle, missing a huge chunk of the right side of his body, and all he can mutter before passing away is Zodd, Nosferatu. Undeterred by this, Guts decides to enter the castle, yet instructs his men to wait outside. Guts is met with dozens of brutalized corpses, as if they've been torn apart like rag dolls. Certainly, something incredibly strong must have done this. As Guts ventures deeper and deeper, he finds the man they call Zodd, a hulking naked man who wields an enormous cutlass-like blade, a blade that currently has two soldiers impaled upon it. In a fit of rage, Guts charges forward, but Zodd knocks him back quite easily as the two corpses come flying off. And this kind of reminds me of a moment in Demon Souls, when the Penetrator tosses the fat official off of his sword. A nice little nod to Berserk there. Zodd advances towards Guts, complimenting the swordsman on his parry timing. The monstrous Zodd attacks with intense ferocity, as Guts blocks just at the last second. Now Zodd's next strike destroys a castle pillar, as though it was mere butter. Guts can do nothing more than defend against Zodd's flurry of attacks, until Zodd sends him flying back into one of the pillars. Despite this, Zodd is quite impressed with the young swordsman's skill, as it's been 50 years since someone has been able to stop his sword for this long. Guts acknowledges Zodd's strength. In fact, this is the strongest person he's ever crossed swords with. His power is simply beyond human. Guts realizes that he's unable to keep blocking, so he intends to gamble everything on one strike. Zodd understands that Guts is relying on the length of his blade to save him, but Zodd wonders if this will be enough to secure victory. Zodd grants Guts his wish, and charges headlong into battle. Guts utilizes a technique that he used against Bazuzo, in which he targets a weak point of the blade to slice through it and deliver the fatal blow. At least, it looked like it would have been the fatal blow, but Zodd used his arms as a final defensive measure. What a surprise. After being pushed that far, I never thought you'd try to break my sword. You're the first human to ever drive a sword that deep into my body, in these past 300 years of slaughter. The monstrous Zodd now holds Guts' sword with his bare hand. Guts' knees shake uncontrollably, sweat pours down his face, and his teeth are chattering from pure fear. He was now staring at pure terror itself. Zodd is thrilled to find someone who can get his blood boiling. Perhaps his whole life has been building to this moment, in which he can finally fight an adversary who can test his limits. Zodd swipes Guts with his left paw, knocking him into a nearby pillar. Zodd roars ferociously, as Guts remains in disbelief that he's actually fighting a real-life monster. Zodd continues to overwhelm Guts with his immense strength. Guts attempts to fight back, but his sword merely bounces off of Zodd's tough exterior. Zodd easily slaps him back, as he wonders if that's all the power that Guts has in him. Despite Guts' admirable efforts, Zodd will show him no mercy. And just before he tears Guts to shreds, numerous arrows pierce his backside, and they came from the various members of the Band of the Hawk, led by the White Hawk, Griffith. But this is not the usual Griffith that we're accustomed to seeing. No, he's much more distressed than usual. Griffith commands his troops to fire another volley of arrows, but the monstrous Zodd merely brushes them off as if they were toothpicks. "I won't have this. No one may defile this battle. I won't have it," says an enraged Zodd. Zodd rams through several soldiers, as the Band of the Hawk is terrified by the sight they are witnessing, especially given the fact that he's gnawing on one of the soldiers as if it were a chew toy. Griffith orders Casca to have everyone withdraw, as the leader makes his way over to Guts. Griffith aids Guts to his feet, as Zodd blocks their path. "Where are you going? Your heart's still beating. Fight! Fight me until you're torn to pieces." Zodd continues his aggression as Guts and Griffith decide to split up. This diversion allows Griffith to cut off Zodd's left arm in one fell swoop. Zodd retaliates by knocking Griffith back with his massive tail. Griffith crashes into one of the nearby pillars, knocking him out completely. Before Guts even has the chance to check on Griffith, Zodd stands over him and says, "What a day today's been, that I'd meet a human, 2 humans, who could wound me so." Zodd then whacks Guts with his severed arm. The beast reattaches his arm through some unknown force, making the conclusion of the battle all the more certain. That is, until Zodd walks up to Griffith and discovers something quite terrifying. A baylet around his neck. And not just any baylet, the egg of the king. The monstrous Zodd remains in disbelief that someone as young as Griffith could be in possession of something so great and powerful. Something that connects him directly with the God Hand. "It's that kind of ploy," chuckles a nervous Zodd. He then punches a hole through the ceiling and decides to offer Guts a piece of advice. "Our battle is on hold for now, boy, but I wonder if we'll ever meet up again. Here's a word of warning, no, a prophecy. If you can be said to be a true friend of this man, then take heed. When his ambition collapses, death will pay you a visit, a death you can never escape." And with this, Zodd bursts through the ceiling and flies off to some unknown location. Now, we don't see Zodd again for a while, not until the Band of the Hawk attempts its siege of Doldry Castle. While fighting General Bascan, Guts' sword snaps in two, and since he was also dismounted from his horse, he's as good as dead. But fortunately for the hulking swordsman, he's got a guardian angel off in the distance, in a manner of speaking, ready to lend a helping hand. And it's none other than Nosferatu Zodd on his horse. General Bascan charges forward with the force of a freight train, obliterating anyone who obstructs his path towards Guts. Zodd then flexes his massive arm, and chucks the massive cutlass towards Guts' general location. Guts takes up the sword, deflects Bascan's attack, and cleaves off his head along with his horse's head in one fell swoop. Afterwards, Guts goes to Doldry Castle, and that's where he decides to leave the sword. But it's clear that he remembers who wielded that very sword, as he wonders why that person decided to help him out. And then off in the distance again, we see Zodd looking very stoic and menacing. And he says, "The eclipse will soon come, and the demon advent approaches." 1 year later, the Band of the Hawk saves Griffith from the Tower of Rebirth. After escaping the Baki Raka and the Black Dog Knights, the Band of the Hawk tries to lick their wounds and rest up. Wyald, unfortunately, has no plans of dying, as he grabs Griffith to show off his mangled body. Before he can proceed any further, he catches a glimpse of something flying in the sky. The Band of the Hawk is panic-stricken by the sudden appearance of Zodd, who towers over the crawling Wyald. Wyald wonders why he's here, but Zodd simply grabs him and impales him with his horns. While torturing Wyald, Zodd meets with Griffith's gaze. Wyald reminds Zodd that apostles are free to do what they want. But given this fact, Zodd is also free to rip him to shreds and spill out his guts. Wyald pleads for mercy, but Zodd just continues tearing his body asunder. After finishing off Wyald, he tells Griffith that the Bailet will return to his hand, because that's just how it is. And with that, the Apostle makes his departure by flying off into the sky. Sometime later, Griffith invokes the fifth eclipse, and we see that Zodd remains in the physical world outside the temporal junction point. In fact, he's confronting the Skull Knight face to face, in what looks to be an epic confrontation. Huh, so you did come. You who would be our foe for a millennium. I figured you wouldn't let this chance slip past, says Zodd to the Skull Knight. Now, it's very interesting that Zodd knows that the Skull Knight has been the foe of the Apostles for over 1,000 years. And not only that, he considers the Skull Knight his old rival, which means they have some sort of history together. Now, of course, this sort of supports my theory that I mentioned at the beginning of the video, but we'll talk about this more later on. Skull Knight says that this is all within causality's current, as the two begin their intense battle. Unfortunately, this is a reoccurring theme within Berserk. Every time Skull Knight and Zodd seem to be having an intense battle, we don't really get to see how the battle plays out. We do know, however, that Skull Knight gets the best of Zodd, as his left arm was cut off in the process. Skull Knight then goes into the eclipse to save Guts and Casca. He drops off the two with Rickert, as Zodd reminds him that this doesn't settle anything. Zodd is then shocked to see that Guts survived the eclipse. Now, given the fact that he'd like to battle both Guts and Skull Knight once more, he gives them the opportunity to escape. In fact, he even warns them that all the Apostles will be coming out very soon once the gate vanishes. So Zodd clearly doesn't see himself in league with the Apostles. He rather moves to his own accord. As Skull Knight escapes with Guts, Casca, and Rickert, Zodd then says, "So he survived the eclipse. Interesting. Show me now. How is it you'll struggle as no more than a man through the world of darkness? In the wilderness of the dead that extends before you, branded swordsman?" 2 years have now passed, and Zodd effortlessly massacres 300 mercenaries. As he sits upon the corpses, he wonders how many times he's scoured battlefields looking for some worthy foe. Even the Apostles don't satisfy his appetite for battle, and therefore Skull Knight seems to be his only worthy foe. But for some reason, he detests this prospect. But then he remembers Guts, the branded swordsman, the man who's been taking down Apostles in the dead of night. Suddenly, a large white hawk glides down to his position. The hawk states that this is between dream and consciousness, an intermediary world, if you will. Understanding that this might be his chance to fight a worthy foe, Zodd unleashes the full brunt of his power. Nevertheless, the hawk is too quick for him, as he performs a swift aerial maneuver not only to dodge Zodd, but to inflict a devastating wound. Upon waking up, Zodd wonders if what he experienced was just a dream. But the sliced off horn on the ground, along with the blood dripping from his face, proves otherwise. Where the sky falls at the holy grounds where blind sheep gather, and erect a pillar of fire, it will come. The desired will come. We then move forward to the incarnation ceremony. Zodd arrives at the outskirts where he comes face to face with his old foe once more, Skull Knight. And once again, we don't really get to see how this battle plays out. The next morning, after the incarnation ceremony, Zodd bursts through a castle wall, to the surprise of Guts and many Kushan warriors. He makes his way over to the reborn Griffith, and in a surprising turn of events, bows in his presence. Griffith places his hand on Zodd's forehead, tacitly making him his first soldier in the new Band of the Falcon. Selak commands his troops to apprehend Griffith, but Zodd tears through them as if they were mere rag dolls. The two then take their leave, ready to commence Griffith's plan of establishing his own empire. Zodd then takes Griffith to the Hill of Swords, and it's there that Griffith gets reunited with Rickert. Guts, understandably, is less than pleased to see Griffith merely shooting the breeze. Griffith's mere words and presence sets Guts into a rage, propelling him to attack with reckless abandon. Zodd intercepts the attack to prevent any harm to the leader, and even with Guts' new sword and increased strength, he's unable to move the hulking Zodd. "You did well to survive, despite my prediction. It pleases me, boy," remarks Zodd. Zodd pushes Guts back, taking the initiative in their second bout. Guts' quick reflexes keep him from losing his head, as he does well to keep pace. This doesn't go unnoticed by Zodd, who praises Guts for his top-notch discipline. Guts then wonders why Zodd would serve a man such as Griffith. Yet Zodd will not be moved by words. For Guts to reach Griffith, he'll have to force his way past. While attacking, Guts is surprised by Zodd's inhuman reflexes. The resulting clashes are rattling Guts' bones. and if he's not careful, his head could be split open in the blink of an eye. But if Guts can push on just a little more and somehow earn this victory, he'll have Griffith within his grasp. Zodd increases the pressure, looking for the decisive blow. Though Guts gets slashed across the cheek, he manages to pierce Zodd in the abdomen with one of his swords from the hill. Zodd's horse-slaying sword that he stole from the Kushans is at its limit, and it's no match for the sturdiness of Guts' Dragon Slayer. So now, it's time for him to abandon the sword, and fight Guts with his true strength in his apostle form. Zodd sends Guts tumbling backwards with a swipe from his massive paw. He then flings Guts into the air with his horn. Zodd embraces his animalistic form in full by running towards Guts on all fours. Guts evades Zodd as Zodd goes crashing into Goto's secret mine. The beast charges out of the cave, sending large chunks of stone flying into the air, some of which are threatening to crush Casca. Griffith saves Casca from the chunks and commands Zodd to stop fighting. And with this, Griffith hops on the Zodd and tells Guts that he will attain his own kingdom. Zodd later appears with Griffith, as the Hawk commences its initial attack on the Kushan invasion force that took over Midland. Zodd brutalizes the Kushans with his brute force. After taking care of the Kushans, Locust, Grumbeld, and Roxas join the band of the Hawk, and thereby offer up their services to Griffith, just as Zodd has. Later on, Griffith's forces tear their way through a Kushan convoy, with Zodd doing some Zodd things. You know, tearing people to shred with reckless abandon. After the battle, Mule is taken through Griffith's camp with the assistance of Sonya. Before meeting with the White Hawk, he comes face to face with Zodd, who keeps a watchful eye on the leader. Later on, Griffith sends Zodd, Grumbeld, and the other war demons to kill the witch Flora. Now Grumbeld wishes to fight Guts as Zodd chooses not to intervene. Zodd then chooses to fight with Skull Knight as he instructs the other war demons to bring Flora's head to him. You going to chase a woman in the middle of battle? That's rather unlike you. Fighting was everything to you, wasn't it, immortal? Says Skull Knight. Don't misunderstand. I'm the only one who can hold you off. It's that, and that alone, replies Zodd. Guts' battle with Grumbeld doesn't go too well, but when he's reinvigorated with the Berserker armor, the tides begin to change. Upon seeing the Berserker armor, Zodd immediately recognizes it and looks over at its previous owner, i.e. the Skull Knight. Ah, the memories, my dear old rival. So you would have him follow you down the same path into hell, says Zodd. Now, this is the other pivotal piece of information that I believe confirms that Skull Knight and Zodd were previously King Geiseric. For one, Zodd is aware that Skull Knight wore the Berserker armor, and we know that Skull Knight lost his humanity to that very armor over 1,000 years ago. So the fact that Zodd is aware that he wore this armor 1,000 years ago means that he has some knowledge of that time period. And I believe it's a very similar situation that we see Guts going through right now with his Berserker armor. Every time he wears that armor, he's fighting off that internal beast of darkness. And for Geiseric to wear that armor in the past, he must have had an internal beast of darkness as well. And I believe that was Zodd, with Skull Knight being the ego portion. And I believe that's the reason why Skull Knight, Zodd, and Guts all seem to be connected. That could be Guts' potential future, splitting off into an ego and a beast of darkness if he's not too careful, with Shirka serving the role as separator, which I believe Flora did in the past. I believe Flora saw the destructive presence of the Berserker armor and decided to separate Skull Knight from the Beast of Darkness before it was too late. And the second piece of information that's important is that Zodd refers to Skull Knight as his dear old rival, which highlights the fact that they've been at odds for quite some time, possibly 1,000 years. And when we think about Guts' rival, we immediately think about Griffith. But if you take a moment to really dwell upon it, his real rival is himself. More specifically, it's the internal beast of darkness that dwells deep within him, that is literally a part of him. And it's like any human being really, the person that we must overcome is ourselves. Because at the end of the day, it's the beast of darkness that aims to take everything away from Guts, sight, warmth, and his very flesh. In the latest chapters, the Beast of Darkness is telling Guts to give up his bone and flesh and everything that he holds dear for more power. Now, after this encounter, the next time we see Zodd is rather strange. Now, every full moon, Griffith transforms into the Moonlight Boy and goes to see his mother, i.e. Casca. To protect Griffith from any harm during this period, Zodd watches over him from afar, as we can see right here in the nearby cliffs. The next time Zodd crosses paths with Guts is at Virtanis Harbor, during the thunderous fight with Emperor Ganishka. Ganishka electrifies Zodd endlessly, leaving him no room to counter. And because he's literally just a cloud, It's impossible to attack him. The continuous electrocution takes its toll on Zodd, as he falls in the guts and knocks him into the water. In a brief flashback, Locust warns Zodd that no attack is effective against Ganishka. The impatient Zodd leaves the conversation without saying a word. He then stumbles across Sonya. She tells him that he has to make a choice: to battle against the sword that cut his flesh, or to make it his own weapon. Now Zodd seems rather confused by this statement, but it's clear from the reader's perspective that he'll have to work with Guts in the upcoming battle. Otherwise, they'll both suffer the consequences. Back in the present, Zodd emerges from the water with Guts hanging onto his back. Guts proposes a temporary alliance as Zodd is thrilled by Guts' urge to kill. This task is easier said than done, however, as no weapon can strike Ganishka's mist. After receiving some useful advice from Shirka, Guts instructs Zodd to fly the way he tells him. Otherwise, he'll lose his head. Zodd reminds Guts that nothing can cut the mist, but he thinks about the words that Sonya imparted upon him. And with this, the two rivals put aside their differences to take down a common foe. Zodd manages to fly through the proxy Ganishka's brow, as Guts successfully strikes it, dispersing the mist and temporarily defeating him. Though they may have come out victorious, the repercussions were quite severe, with both experiencing severe burns. Now Zodd demands for the Black Swordsman to stand up so that they can finish their fight. Guts leaps to his feet, but Zodd decides it would be best for them to be at full strength so that they can battle to their heart's content. Now one of the war demons wants to take this opportunity to eliminate Guts here and now, but Zodd says that they will not indulge in their cravings, as their mission here is done. However, if Guts decides to confront Griffith, that's a whole different matter. A matter in which Guts will be forced to send the entire army to tear Guts to pieces. Serpico wisely intervenes on Guts' part, as the Black Swordsman realizes that he shouldn't push his luck. And with this, Zodd takes off. Griffith's army confronts Ganishka's main forces at Virtanis, with Zodd slaughtering many Kushans in the process. I mean, what else is new? As a result, Ganishka feels pressured to accumulate more power, so he delves into Daiba's man-made Beylit to transform himself into Shiva. Even though he crushes his own army in a state of delirium, the pools of Kushan soldiers transform into tentacled monsters. And it's these monsters that Zodd and the other war demons fight in their apostle forms. And it rather seems like Zodd is enjoying himself in the killing frenzy. Again, what else is new? Eventually though, it's time for Griffith and Zodd to put an end to things, by confronting the leader head on. Zodd creates a sonic boom by flying into the air with Griffith on top of him. He then takes Griffith to Ganishka's true head, as it looks like victory is assured. As Femto reaches out to touch Ganishka, a portal is then torn open behind the God Hand member, and out steps the Skull Knight with the Beylit sword in hand. Skull Knight swings at Femto, as Zodd attacks Skull Knight. And even though Skull Knight dodged Zodd's attack, Femto manipulated the rift created by the Beylit sword to open up a door to a region still deeper in the spiritual world. And as a result, this would bring about the Age of Fantasia, an age that would intertwine the physical and the spiritual worlds. After the establishment of Falconia, the new capital of Midland, Griffith and the Band of the Falcon engaged the Jotnar in a battle. And as always, Zodd leads the charge for the war demons. Zodd engages a Hydra, strangling and biting off several heads in the process, while Irvine provides support from afar. Grunbelt then finishes it off with his fire breath, as the Jotnar leader is flabbergasted by what he's seeing. The battle ends with Griffith piercing the leader in the eye with his sword, as the Band of the Falcon enjoys the spoils of their victory, by standing in a very stoic and victorious fashion. Sometime later, Griffith would transform into the Moonlight Boy again, traveling off to Elfhelm to visit his mother. And we know from his previous transformation that Zodd would be close at hand. After spending a bit of time with his parents, the Moonlight Boy would transform back into Griffith, right in front of Guts' face. And rest assured, the Black Swordsman didn't waste an opportunity in trying to take down the White Hawk. Guts' attacks proved to be ineffectual, yet Zodd still decided to intervene to protect his leader. The Immortal and the Black Swordsman fought for the third time in their lives, but in a surprising turn of events, Guts ducks past him and makes a beeline for Griffith. But it all turns out to be for naught, as Guts is unable to harm Griffith in any fashion. As the island collapses, Griffith grabs on the Casca and makes his escape with Zodd back to Falconia. The three would use the World Spiral Tree to make it back in relatively quick fashion, as they would be greeted by the main members of the Falcon. A bit later, we would see that Casca was being held captive in a dreamlike state, a measure that seemed quite drastic, one in which Zodd seemed quite uneasy about. Now, does this mean that Zodd would eventually turn on Griffith and start working with Guts instead? Well, the thing is, we just don't know yet. As of right now, we don't have any more chapters to go on, but it is a very drastic change in personality for Zodd. I've never really seen him somber before, so it's possible that anything's on the table at this point. But for now, we're just gonna have to wait and see. And that's gonna be the end of Zodd's life, at least for now that is.